Julius Caesar, the most famous Roman of them all. Astute politician, masterful, if ruthless, military tactician, a moving public speaker who was adored by the common man, fabled lover, emperor in all but name, then brutally assassinated after ignoring warnings for his safety. Could his final recklessness have been caused by a brain tumour? I'm Professor Graham Youlston, neuropsychiatrist, and today I'm going to be talking about Julius Caesar and his battles with epilepsy, and how a brain disorder could have cost him his life. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in 100 BC to a noble but not particularly wealthy family. He had to work hard to move up the ranks in Roman society, and goodness me did he work hard. His slow but relentless rise to the position of dictator perpetuus, or dictator for life, earned him many enemies who conspired to hack him to death at the age of 55. We know him through Shakespeare, through films, through television series, but how much do we really know about him? We know he was born by caesarean section, except he wasn't. His mother lived until he was 16 years old, and the earliest known C-section in which the woman actually survived wasn't until the 16th century. There are as many myths about Julius Caesar as there are hard facts, and it can be difficult knowing who or what to believe. Our main sources are Caesar's own accounts of the Gallic War and the Civil War, hardly likely to be unbiased, and the historians Plutarch and Suetonius, both of whom were writing over 100 years after his death. So, understandably, there are gaps and inconsistencies in his life story. Suetonius describes Caesar as tall, of a fair complexion, round-limbed, rather full-faced, with black, piercing eyes. This bust is the only representation of him made during his lifetime, and his skull shape is a little unusual, which has led to a controversial reconstruction of how he might have looked. Caesar had to grow up in an era of political instability and bloody civil wars. When he was 16, his father died suddenly, and he became head of the family. He got married to his first wife, Cornelia, but, unfortunately, she was related to the losing side in the war, which resulted in Caesar being stripped of his inheritance and his position as High Priest of Jupiter, and forced into hiding. He decided to join the army so he could keep well away from the intrigues in Rome, and he served with distinction as the Republic expanded into modern-day Turkey. Caesar felt safe enough to return to Rome in 68 BC when the dictator Sulla died. He was poor, and he had to earn his living as a criminal lawyer, gaining a reputation as a passionate public speaker as he argued for the prosecution of former governors who had indulged a little too much in extortion and corruption. At some point in his 20s, he decided to go to the island of Rhodes to study with the famous master of rhetoric, Apollonius. On the way, he was captured by pirates who demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver. With all the hubris and bravado that brought him military success later in life, Caesar insisted that they should ask for more, 50 talents. After 40 days it was paid and he was free to go, but he vowed to return to have them all crucified. And, man of his word, this is precisely what he did. Interestingly, from a medical point of view, Suetonius tells us that he was accompanied only by a physician and 2 body servants, sending away all of his other travelling companions and attendants to procure his ransom. This is the first clue that Caesar may have had a serious health problem throughout his life. Why else would a young man have chosen to have a doctor at his side instead of a soldier? In 73 BC, a certain gladiator made a stand against Roman power and the evils of slavery. We don't know if Caesar was actively involved in the crushing of the slave revolt, but he was a military tribune at this time and a friend of Crassus, so it is likely that he would have been. At the age of 31, he was sent to Spain as a quaestor a low-ranking magistrate. And on seeing a statue of Alexander the Great, he despaired that he was now at an age when Alexander had conquered the world, while he had achieved almost nothing. He returned to Rome after 2 years and got married again, but the union did not last long because his wife was embroiled in sexual scandals, and the wife of Caesar had to be beyond reproach. Caesar, on the other hand, was able to enjoy a rich social life, such that the gossip mongers called him husband of all the women in Rome. He was also busy getting himself elected to various public offices, including Pontifex Maximus, with accusations of bribery being flung around by all sides. At 39 he went back to Spain, this time as governor. 2 years later he was elected consul, and after serving his year was made governor of Cisalpine Gaul, or northern Italy. This is when the legend of Julius Caesar really begins. Over the next 7 years, his legions bludgeoned their way across northern Europe, winning victories against the Swiss, the Belgians, and Germanic tribes. He had a quick look at Britain, but wasn't too impressed by what he saw, so he left it to the Druids. He brought the whole of Gaul, modern France, under Roman rule, fighting 30 pitched battles, capturing 800 towns, and killing over 1 million warriors, and enslaving 1 million more. At the end of these wars, he declared his well-known Veni, Vidi, Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered. And he dragged the broken Celtic leader Vercingetorix back to Rome in chains. But trouble was brewing. His rivals feared his growing power and popularity, and the Senate demanded he stand down his army as their job in conquering Gaul was complete. When Caesar refused and moved his legions across the river Rubicon in 49 BC, the Roman Republic was plunged into civil war. Over the next 2 years, Caesar led his troops to victory after victory against Pompey at battlefields across Europe and North Africa. After the decisive battle at Pharsalus in Greece, he pursued Pompey into Egypt, but he was murdered by the pharaoh's advisors before Caesar could get to him. With the Roman civil war effectively over, Caesar decided to stay on and support Cleopatra, in more ways than one, in her own civil war with her brother Ptolemy. Their alliance resulted in a child, Caesarion, his only natural son. After mopping up the last remaining supporters of Pompey and his sons, he returned to Rome in triumph and ordered extravagant games in which huge armies of war captives fought to the death. The Senate appointed him dictator for 10 years, and he embarked on an ambitious legislative program of much-needed reforms. In 45 BC, he was declared dictator perpetuus, or perpetual dictator. But after just a few weeks, ignoring warnings that his life was in danger and dismissing his guards, he walked out alone and was stabbed to death by a conspiracy of senators. Was this final act the hubris of a man accustomed to victory, or the lack of foresight of someone with impaired judgment as a result of a brain disorder? There have been many suggestions as to what might have affected Caesar in his final 2 years, to explain 2 or 3 key passages in the histories. Suetonius tells us that he was sound of health, except that towards the end he was subject to sudden fainting fits and to nightmares as well. He was twice attacked by the falling sickness during his campaigns. Plutarch provides more detail, saying he had distemper in the head and was subject to epileptic fits. He gives 2 accounts of the Battle of Thapsus in modern-day Tunisia in 46 BC, less than a year before his death, in which Caesar destroys the last remnants of Pompey's supporters. In one account, Caesar displays tactical brilliance and slays 50,000 of the enemy with the loss of only 50 of his own men. But Plutarch also gives an alternative account in which Caesar was not involved in the action. As he was marshalling his army, his usual sickness laid hold of him. He, at once aware that it was beginning, before his already wavering senses were altogether confounded and overpowered by the malady, was carried to a neighbouring tower, where he stayed quietly during the battle. Plutarch also describes an episode when Caesar did not rise to greet a group of senators who wished to offer him the emperor's crown. They were insulted by his actions, but he apologised, saying he had an illness in which his senses do not remain steady but are speedily shaken and whirled about, bringing on giddiness and insensibility. However, Plutarch was clear that Caesar was using his illness as an excuse on this occasion and contrasts it to earlier episodes. So it seems that both historians were clear that Caesar had epilepsy. But how much was known about epilepsy at this time? Epilepsy was certainly known to the ancients. 300 years before Caesar was born, the Greek physician Hippocrates, known as the father of medicine, described epilepsy in detail and asserted for the first time that it was due to dysfunction of the brain rather than the influence of the gods. The Romans called epilepsy morbus comitialis, as an attack could spoil or break up a committee or assembly of people. But there was a range of other terms that were used. The Roman poet and philosopher Lucretius, an almost exact contemporary of Caesar, clearly describes epilepsy in his great work On the Nature of Things. But could there be any other explanations for Caesar's attacks? One suggestion is that they were no more than the giddiness of Meniere's disease. Another is that he feigned epilepsy to convince people that he had a sacred disease. Another is that his attacks may have been brought on by diarrhea caused by celiac disease. None of these seems very likely to me. I think we would be doing Roman physicians a disservice if we did not credit them with the ability to distinguish between diarrhea and epilepsy. Another possibility is that he had malaria, as Suetonius tells us he had quartan ague or malaria in his youth. But again, the Romans were very familiar with malaria and would surely have recognised it as such. I believe the evidence is strong that Caesar did suffer from epileptic seizures. If we accept this, then we have to move on to the question of what caused his epilepsy, as this can have a bearing on his behaviour. Possibilities include head injury, stroke, syphilis, alcohol, tuberculosis, tapeworm larvae, brain tumour, arteriovenous malformation, or Hartnup disease. We could dismiss some of these as there is no evidence to suggest he had other symptoms of tuberculosis or a stroke. Syphilis certainly can cause seizures, but most medical historians believe that it was not present in Europe at this time. Alcohol withdrawal could explain his symptoms, but all contemporary sources agree that he was not intemperate. He may also have had inherited epilepsy. We know that several close relatives, including his father and the Emperor Caligula, had either epilepsy or unexplained or sudden deaths, which is known to occur more commonly in epilepsy. Two of the grandchildren of Julius Caesar's sister also had some rather odd symptoms. One had a problem of deep sleep and another with fainting attacks. Could these two have been manifestations of epilepsy? Even if we discount the more speculative cases, then there are 3 probable cases of epilepsy in the descendants of Julius Caesar and his sister, a much higher prevalence than will be expected by chance. But genetic forms of epilepsy usually result in seizures throughout life, and the sources suggest that his attacks started in his 50s. Slow-growing brain tumours and/or vascular malformations can lead to new-onset seizures in midlife, as can neurocysticercosis or tapeworm larvae in the brain. Look away now if you're squeamish. Humans acquire cysticercosis by ingesting food contaminated with Taenia solium eggs, the pork tapeworm. Part of the egg penetrates the gut wall and migrates to different tissues, where it matures into the larval form or scolex inside a fluid-filled cyst. One of the sites they can form is the brain, where they can cause focal seizures. You can have one or lots. It is entirely possible that Caesar may have picked up a tapeworm on his campaigns in North Africa or Egypt. As well as causing epilepsy, tumours, arteriovenous malformations and tapeworm larvae in the brain can affect behaviour. Anything that damages the frontal lobes of the brain or its connections can affect judgment, planning and risk perception. If Caesar had a brain disorder, it could explain why he dismissed his guards and the warnings and walked out unprotected to his death. But before I finish, there is one other explanation we have not so far considered, that he wanted to die. His office of dictator for life was uncomfortably close to kingship, something abhorred by the Romans for centuries. Did he choose to give up his life rather than risk his legacy being tainted by accusations of tyranny? Or was he so aware of his deteriorating health that he preferred to depart his mortal coil while still in full command of his mind and body, rather than descending into decrepitude? Suetonius gives a strong hint, saying that Caesar left in the minds of some of his friends the suspicion that he did not wish to live longer and had taken no precautions because of his failing health. Thank you for watching. If you've enjoyed it, please like and subscribe, and keep the comments and suggestions for future topics coming in. See you next time.